Welcome to the webinar for Florida PLT Facilitators on virtual PLT professional development training experiences. We're really glad that you're here. And also what's great is we have this recording. So if you know of other facilitators who were not able to join us this morning but are interested in learning more about virtual training opportunities, there will be a recording available. So that's great. Welcome everybody, and thanks so much for being here. Sorry about the technical difficulties. That's just the way of the world these days when using these online platforms. It's like no matter how much you do to be prepared and try to make sure things won't happen, something's going to happen. So that's just part of the process, and want to encourage everybody who either feels a little bit uncomfortable with online platforms or doesn't like them to just understand that everybody out there understands that technical issues are going to happen, and that's just part of it. But we do have these tools available to us, and they can be very, very helpful in times when we can't get together in person. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Ireland. I'm the coordinator of Florida PLT, and we're at the University of Florida School of Forest Resources and Conservation. So glad to see all of you here with us this morning. So we're going to do our best to avoid a webinar like this, where we have lots of technical issues. I know most of us are working from home, so internet broadband issues can be sometimes problematic as well, but we're going to do our best to avoid a webinar like this. And so on that note, a few tips and tricks for using Zoom. If you're not familiar, if you are, just sit back and relax during this part. But so everyone is muted right now. And the only reason for that is just to avoid any unnecessary background noise. So want to encourage you throughout the webinar to feel free to unmute yourself and participate in discussions, and then just to remute yourself when you're done so that we don't have the background noise. So at the bottom of your screen, you see a mute button, and you can click on that to mute and unmute yourself. Video. So we're going to have the video on for the introductions and the breakout room discussions, but I do encourage you to probably turn them off when we're just having presentations, because if you are having any broadband issues, having your video off will help prevent that. We will use and do encourage you to use the chat feature to enter comments or questions. So you click on chat to open the dialog box, and we will respond to chat questions in the chat box throughout the webinar, and we'll also have dedicated times for discussion. So feel free to enter any comments or questions in the chat feature anytime throughout the webinar. You can also raise your hand. This feature can be a little clunky and less user-friendly, but if you do like this option, you click on participants, find your name, click on more, and then click on the hand icon to raise and lower your hand. For view options, you want to be in full screen mode, especially when we are sharing a screen for a presentation. So just make sure you are in that full screen mode option. Also, when we do share a presentation, you will have different options for your video layout. You'll have the active speaker view option, which will only show the person that is presenting or speaking. And then you have two options to see a gallery view of the speaker and all of the participants. So basically in your video view box, you see these different squares. The big square is active speaker, the two squares is a view strip, and view, and all of the dots is a view grid. So feel free to toggle that around and play with that to get the view that works best for you. So I wanted to start with just a few quick poll questions. And the first one is, have you been participating in virtual trainings, webinars, or online hosted sessions the past few months? So if you could just click yes or no and let us know. So it looks like the majority of us have been spending quite a bit of time on virtual trainings and webinars. And I think we've probably all have learned that they have great benefits and also some pitfalls. And so we'll talk a lot about that today during the webinar. I also wanted to just kind of get a sense of how everybody's feeling about potentially facilitating virtual PLT trainings. Are you excited, ready to go, interested, but a little apprehensive, or maybe at this point not particularly interested? So if you'll just share your feelings on the poll. Okay, so it looks like I'm really excited that nobody is not particularly interested, although I wouldn't mind that so much. The slight majority is interested but apprehensive, and then the rest of us are excited, ready to do it. I would imagine that most that are excited, ready to do it are those who've been involved in the virtual trainings that we've been doing so far this summer. I know that when we first started doing this, I think all of us felt slightly apprehensive because what we do with PLT trainings is inherently in-person, hands-on, and interactive in that way. So thinking about how to do it in a virtual environment has been both exciting and fun, but also a little scary. So great. So thanks for sharing your input on that. So I want to get a sense of where everybody's participating from. And so to do this, we're going to use the annotate feature. And to access the annotate feature, if you haven't used it before, you click on view options, then you click on annotate, and then you can select draw and use an arrow tool to show where you are participating from. So again, you go to view options, then annotate, then draw. And if you want to do it in a different way, like put a heart or a star, feel free to just play around and use it how you'd like. So great. So we've got Tallahassee, Jacksonville, the Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete area, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm area, Collier. Yeah, and the tricky thing with the arrow with your name is that only one person's arrow and name will show up at a time. And as soon as somebody else uses it, yours disappears. So instead, either use the draw feature or like a heart, the shape, like a heart or a star or something like that. That's the tricky thing. At first we were you learn things about Zoom when you use it a lot. At first we were gonna use that and have everybody's name on the map. And then we realized, oh, as soon as the next person types their name, the others disappear. So Beth says Winter Haven. No worries, Beth, on the annotate feature. It can be tricky sometimes. And we looks like, I think we have maybe Barb Bowler or some others from Georgia PLT. Oh, Barb's with Florida PLT as well, but I think we had some folks from Georgia PLT who were joining us as well. Great to see that cross-state collaboration. Okay, so we really are spanning the state. We've got Panama City. I think there's an arrow over there in the far western part of the state. I'm not sure, or actually looks like it's out of Florida. But we're really covering the full state from Miami all the way up to Tallahassee and into the Panhandle. So really excited to have everybody here and welcome again. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so Dawn mentions that if you're on a tablet or phone, you don't get all the options that you get. So that is a good point to make. Greg is with us from Boca Raton. So welcome. Okay, and now what I have to do is clear the annotations. Okay, great. All right, so what I wanted to start by thanking all of our facilitators who have helped with the trainings that we've been doing so far this summer. We have hosted 4 virtual professional development trainings in June and July for educators across the state of Florida. And we would not have been able to do it without this incredible team of facilitators. So Elise Cassie, as you all know, is an assistant coordinator with Florida PLT. Dana Sussman is a senior forester with the Florida Forest Service in the Orlando district. And she's also a Florida PLT steering committee member. Dawn Perez, who wasn't able to be with us today, but she's an education specialist with the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County. Janet Schnaus is elementary science specialist with Duval County Public Schools. Karen Johnson, academic coach, science academic coach, Shields Middle School, also a Florida PLT steering committee member. Kirsten Brazier, first grade teacher, and a PLT school coordinator at Crawfordville Elementary, also a steering committee member. Marnie Richards, environmental education coordinator with the Florida Wildlife Federation. Sue Flack, recycling and education and marketing coordinator, solid waste disposal district, Indian River County, also a steering committee member. And Suzette Gagnon, STEM coordinator with Christ the King Catholic School in Jacksonville, and a steering committee member as well. So that team of facilitators has been integral in making this happen, and just want to give them a round of applause for all the hard work they put into this. And you will be experiencing the activities that they've been facilitating during today's webinar. Before we jump into the activities and the rest of the webinar and get out of the introductions, I just wanted to touch base and check in and find out, what are your expectations for today's training? What do you hope to get out of this webinar today? And if you could share your thoughts in the chat feature. How to conduct virtual trainings, how to adapt PLT activities for a virtual environment, meet more facilitators from around the state. That's great. Get ideas for hosting virtual trainings in Georgia. Great, thanks Gail and welcome. And Lara says, find other people who can co-teach a virtual training with and see how other people are doing virtual trainings. Other resources that teachers can share with peers and students. How to most effectively do an online training. Wonderful. And we also have adapt trainings to virtual, adapt lessons to virtual. Find a place to help. Hope's a fairly new facilitator, but doesn't want to go it alone the first time. That's wonderful. Cole says technical tips are always helpful. Dawn says others' ideas in doing virtual training. So that's great. And that's really the purpose of all of that, is what we hope to at least partially achieve during today's webinar. As I said before, we've been doing these throughout the summer, Elise and I and the team of facilitators that I just introduced. And so we have a model in place. We have a lot of lessons learned. We have some things that went really well and some things that we learned and adapted as we went along. And so we wanted to share that with you, and then just have some time for discussion to offer an opportunity to talk to each other about how we might work together, or how we might do things differently, or different ways to do virtual trainings. And Tish asked if we've tried using Teams instead of Zoom. Not so far. As everybody knows, there's lots of different online platforms available for hosting webinars. All of the ones we've done so far this summer have been on Zoom, but there are other platforms available. For those of you who don't have access to online platforms through your place of work, we can help you with that through the University of Florida, through our office here. So that's something that we'll talk in more detail about a little bit later. So the objectives of today, we are going to experience a virtual tree identification hike with Dana Sussman, so that's wonderful. We're going to explore and participate in selected activities, and we're going to identify strategies and share ideas for virtual professional development trainings. And real quick, I'm just going to clear that annotation there. Okay. So where we are, what our agenda is. So we're finishing up the welcome, review agenda, and objectives. The introduction to PLT piece we're not going to do for today's webinar, but for the educator webinars, we did have a small component of the webinar, very brief, high-level introduction to what Project Learning Tree is. We're going to do an icebreaker with Elise, We All Need Trees, using the We All Need Trees activities. We'll do the tree identification hike. And then we're going to do 3 more PLT activities: Water Wonders, Tree Cookies, and Web of Life. And after those activities, we're going to have a breakout discussion just to talk about how your ideas related to those virtual adaptations of the activity, what additional ideas you might have, how well it worked, what you would do differently, etc. We'll hear some input from the facilitators who've been helping with the virtual trainings that we've been doing throughout the summer. And then we're going to have 20 minutes to share ideas and share questions. And then we'll wrap up. Okay, so this slide, the introduction to PLT piece, I'm just going to quickly move through this, but I wanted to show you that typically with the educators, we're giving them a high-level overview of the mission of PLT and what the goals of PLT are, and the fact that it is a three-pronged approach with the materials, professional development, and the network. And that the curriculum is diverse, multidisciplinary for all age levels, aligned to Florida standards, and that we're housed in the UF School of Forest Resources and Conservation, and that our network is made up of an incredible team, network of facilitators, our steering committee, our staff, and then our schools and EE centers. So with that, we are done with the introduction. Just a quick check-in. How's everybody doing? Any questions or concerns? We're going to move into the PLT activities and presentations at this point. Everybody feeling good, ready to go? Okay. Again, feel free to share any questions or concerns in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elise.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody and feel connected. It's been a while, so it's a nice thing. I just wanted to let you all know also the activities that we're going to be conducting are just like we would do for an educator training. So if we don't want to insult your knowledge, but we just want to make sure that you know how we've been running the educator training. So with that, I hope you did some of your pre-webinar work and that you have your favorite tree product from home, that you have it with you because we're going to be sharing those. And Jessica, do you have the slide? Yes, you, sorry, it's right up there. I wasn't even looking at it. Okay. So how we can do this is several ways. I think the easiest at this point is if you could raise your hand and share, if you could tell us your name, your organization, and what your favorite product is and why. We won't be able to get to everybody, but we will have an opportunity for everybody to share their product with the activity. So with that, if we can see, and you can just raise your hand like this. That's the easiest thing to do, I think. And if not,
Beth raised her hand.
Perfect.
Beth, do you want to go ahead? And remember to unmute yourself.
My favorite tree
your
product
video on if you can.
Collection of baskets. Did you hear me?
A collection of baskets is what you said, correct?
Right.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else?
I see Hope Myers.
Great.
And then Tish.
My favorite product is toilet paper. We found from the coronavirus that this becomes people's first panic point. So very useful.
Hope, it was kind of hard to hear you. Are you farther away from your?
Sorry, my favorite, well.
Thank you.
We all found out the value of toilet paper
Right.
from coronavirus and the panic hoarding. And I think the grocery stores are finally starting to heal.
Thank you. And
do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Me. Okay, I'm Tish Rowland. I have chopsticks, and I think they're very important for eating purposes. I love to teach people how to use them, and I have a set at work. I have one everywhere. Cool.
Great, thanks. Does anybody else want to share?
I'll share. So I actually have, I know it's kind of an obvious one, but a tree cookie. This is from my first PLT training I ever did when I was back in college, from Martha Monroe, and it's like very nice, and they like treated it with like a wax coating, so I use this as a coaster in my office.
Wow, thank you, Lara. All right, I think if anybody else doesn't have a burning desire to share, we'll.
Mary raised her hand real quick.
Maybe. Okay, great.
No one mentioned food, so food is always my favorite from trees. So I grabbed my like nut mix for all of that, and it was kind of fun. I looked up all the trees that, like a cashew tree and stuff like that. So I thought that was really interesting before the activity. So
Great, thank you. That's great, Mary. Appreciate it. Okay, if we didn't get to share, we will in a little bit, so no worries there. But I want to ask everybody a question and pretend you don't know anything. So what does a pencil, a cinnamon stick, and a sponge have in common? And you can shout it out, that's fine. We'll be casual here if you want to. So in case you didn't know, they're all made from trees, or they have tree products. And the fun fact is there's over 5,000 products made from trees. So that's quite a lot. Okay, so Jessica, if you can put the objective slide up, that would be great. So the activity today is we all need trees, and it has two primary objectives. The first one is that students will look at different products and to determine which products are made from trees. And students describe ways trees are used to make products and ways they can be conserved. What we're going to be doing is experience the younger version, so an early elementary version of this. And the activity provides opportunities for classifying and categorizing, and for older elementary students, group work, research and writing opportunities as well, and evaluation practice. So we are going to experience categorizing our favorite tree products. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use our virtual whiteboard. And Jessica had mentioned that in the beginning. You're going to need to go up to your view options. And when you see that, you're going to click up the annotate, and then you'll see that text tool. So similar to what we did on the map, but what you're going to do is actually type in your product underneath the category. We're going to have 3 categories. So we have food, wood, and paper. I mean, these are very basic categories, but like I said, this is for younger students. So if you have a problem with that, you can let us know in the chat, and we can help you with that. But if not, if you can take your tree product, great. Okay, so somebody already has done that under wood for pencil. Okay, let's see, we have tea, toilet paper, yay. Think so. Let's see, what else? Wooden spoon, play program, great. Great, so we have, all sorts of food. Yeah, chocolate, of course, wonderful. Glad somebody put that down there. A tree cookie, yay, Lara. All right, let's see what else. Books, yes, wonderful. Great, and you can keep putting them up as I'm, okay, good. Yeah, now some of these will show that they can go into other categories when you do it with older students, but that's great. Sorry, I'm laughing, Lara, at Emily's recorder. I'm thinking that's yours, but I'm not sure.
It is.
Okay.
She just learned how to blow in her recorder.
Yay, great. Well, this is great. So this is a simple way to do this. I'm not sure how teachers can do this with younger, with the really young, like kindergarten, but certainly a little bit older, early on elementary. I think this would work really well. So we're going to move on and just want to describe the activity a little bit, because there's several parts to it, and it has 2 parts actually. So the first part is part A, tree detectives, which you just experienced. It involves classifying products into groups using pictures of products or actual products. And for older students, you can expand the categories to reflect the list on the left. So that is directly out of the book. And you see you can actually put cellulose products, bark products, and and such if you want to expand that. And then the list to the right that's available actually on the Florida Forest Service website, also on the Florida Forestry Association website, and it will be available as a resource for you at the end that you can access too. So, okay. So part B is tree treasures, and it involves dividing students into teams of 4. They work together to determine which products are made from trees or have an ingredient from trees. Team members need to agree if the product is to be put on the list. And then once they're complete, they're given a set of 4 short tree readings. Yeah, you had that, Jessica, the tree reading one. I just wanted to show everybody because they are short, but each team would get one. And they go in a little bit more detail. One talks about a very brief history about paper making. Another one talks about cellulose, actually several do, but then they get to reevaluate to see which of their products, if they've evaluated them correctly. So that's kind of a nice activity with that. We're gonna look at a short video clip to get an overview of trees to lumber to see the scale of it. We actually had 2 clips here, but we realized that time can get away from you when you're doing virtual training. So we're going to look at the first clip, and it's from Georgia for Georgia people.
We've seen trees grow and we've seen trees cut down. But what happens to the tree after it hits the mill is just the start of its next journey. This is fantastic. I feel like sensory overload. The smell is wonderful. Where are we right now?
Well, we're in the log yard portion of the sawmill in Perry, Georgia. Every species has their own smell. You know, some people love the smell of southern yellow pine. Almost everybody loves the smell of cedar, but all sawmills typically smell pretty good if you like the smell of wood.
What do you guys do here?
So our main job here is to safely convert logs into lumber to be sold for end use with the customer.
So when I see logs going down the highway on a huge truck, is it coming here?
They're all coming here, hopefully all the good ones.
And then what happens?
So as you can see behind us, the logs will show up in trucks. They'll be weighed at a scale. Once they get into the log yard behind us, they'll be unloaded, put into the crane pile. After a couple of days, they'll be loaded into the mill and processed into lumber.
About how many shipments do you guys get in a day?
We run about 75 semi-trucks full of logs each day.
That is a lot of trees.
Most of these logs come from land owned privately versus land owned by the government. All of these logs come within a 100-mile radius of this plant site. There's such a plentiful supply of logs all throughout Georgia that we don't have to travel long distances to bring them back.
And then when you have the finished product, where does it go after that?
There's a number of uses for our finished product. Some goes into fence building, some goes into making pallets, some is for building trusses and doors and walls inside houses. And each type of wood, every piece is graded so we know where that piece could be used.
So your products go through testing and receive grades kind of like us.
That's right. Once it's graded, it'll get banded, it'll get strapped, we'll put a package on it, and it'll be ready for shipment to the customer.
And all of that happens right here in the lumber yard?
All of the product gets made here and shipped from here. So if you're out in your yard looking at your fence or even looking at your home, there's a very good chance, being one of the largest lumber producers in the region, that wood came from Interfor.
All right, thank you, Jessica. You can see that there's always some glitches, like the video wasn't working that well. At one point, I think we had to not show it because there was some lag, but this worked out okay. And I appreciate everybody's suggestions already. I'm looking at those. I hope we have a chance to talk about some of these a little bit later. But so there are 2 additional suggestions under the enrichment section, or I like to call them extension activities. Make a treasure tree and find a mystery product. So a class can make a treasure tree with a dead branch or hanging tree products on a branch. Or if Jessica, if you could put the tree treasure one. Yeah, great. Or students can make their own, and that would be the one to the right, where you just take a paper towel tube, put some pencils as branches, and they can either be assigned products or they can come up with their own and do research and maybe do maybe a key for their products. So that was just something that they can either do on their own. And some of you may recognize the one on the left, which has been around for a while. It's a treasure tree or treasure tree that we use for exhibits or displays. And we refreshed it starting in March. We decided we were going to do that. So there's that activity. And then the last one is an enrichment or extension activity. We typically use this as an icebreaker, often use it as an icebreaker for in-person trainings. It's fun with students. And essentially it's a variation on 20 questions where you tape a tree product picture to each student's back, and the student can only ask each person 2 yes or no questions and then move on to the next person until they discover what their product is. So it's always nice when you get a picture and participants are enjoying themselves. So I particularly like this picture. And then the next slide is the tree product cards, which we put together. I think there's 20 of these. They'll be available to download if you want to use them and make your own. There's also a key that goes along with the products, and all of these products for the treasure tree product cards are on our treasure tree. So that'll be available to you all. So we do have all of these and everything that all the activities you experience, you'll be able to access a lot of these resources. And I think that's about it.
Great, thank you. And I have to apologize for the video. I've had a few weeks off of Zoom, and I forgot that when you are sharing your screen and you have a video going, you cannot do anything else on your computer, because as soon as you click somewhere else on your computer, it pauses the video. So that was my bad, but I'm glad that it worked fairly well. And so, yeah, so I want to give kudos to Elise, because the cards and the tree treasure materials, she spent a lot of time this summer putting those together so that we could provide them to educators after the virtual training. So what we've done is we set up a Google Drive where we put all of the resources from the different activities onto that drive. And so we'll be sharing that with you all as well. We look forward to creating more resources and sharing them with educators and facilitators, because when you do it virtually, it's hard when you can't put your hands on something or actually see how something works. But if we can provide them with those resources afterwards, then it makes it more of a complete experience. So thanks so much, Elise, for all your hard work on that. And thanks to everybody for sharing your tree products. And this is another slide that we showed just to give the educators an idea of what the activity looks like in the guide. And so next, we are lucky enough to have the opportunity to go on a virtual tree identification hike with Dana Sussman. And I don't know about your weather outside today, but it's a little cloudy and muggy today. So maybe a virtual hike would actually be preferred. So I'll turn it over to Dana at this point.
Okay, I think I've got it all. Can you see the screen and hear me?
Looks great and loud and clear.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Sussman, and I'm a senior forester with the Florida Forest Service. And I work in the Orlando district, Orange, Osceola, Seminole, and Brevard counties. Hopefully many of you have met my counterparts throughout the state. We're all involved to a certain degree with environmental education. Our primary duties relate to the 3rd and 4th categories, shown here, private landowner assistance, and then community and landowner education. So today, if this were an in-person training, we would be able to go outside and take a walk, but because we're doing this virtually, I chose a location near me, the University of Central Florida Arboretum, to put together a virtual tree ID hike. It's fairly simple. All the photos come from the Arboretum. I took them as went out there a few times, but as you watch it, I'm sure you'll have many ideas about how you could adapt this to various topics related to ecology, botany, biology, and the grade level adaptations using a phone to take pictures or even video. The UCF Arboretum provides opportunities for students, staff, and visitors to explore and learn about Florida's diverse ecosystems and the plant life they support. Many arboretums are somewhat formal in their presentation, although they're primarily devoted to trees. The UCF Arboretum is unique in that it actually has two areas. One is a little bit more formal, and the other is actually what we would call, environmental lands. Some of the arboretums you may have heard about, the Morton Arboretum near Chicago, the U.S. National Arboretum, all typically do research and are open to the general public so they can come and view plants. So I would imagine near you, there is some type of garden or natural area where you can walk and learn and take pictures and put together some kind of hike, or even the school grounds if you have access to them, or people's neighborhoods. So as I mentioned, the UCF Arboretum has two areas, and the one we're gonna walk through today is their basically outdoor laboratory, where they have a variety of different ecosystems. We're gonna focus on the first four: scrubby flatwoods, scrub, mesic flatwoods, and the wet flatwoods. The UCF Arboretum is located on the east side of campus. It's fairly small, about a mile square, but within that there is a great deal of diversity. So it's a wonderful place to go and see within a small area the many different plants, animals, ecosystems in Florida. So this shows a map of the Arboretum. We're going to focus on this area here, and you see from the different colors of trails that they've laid it out so that you can choose a specific trail. And then I'm not sure how easily you can read the descriptions of the ecosystems, but you see that in a relatively small area, you can visit quite a few of them. It is an urban area, but they do prescribe burning. They do a lot of land management activities, both as classroom opportunities for students at UCF and for the general public to be able to see what land management in our ecosystems entails. So today we're going to learn to identify a few of the trees native to Florida, which we would see growing in the Arboretum, and we'll talk just a little bit about some of the complexity of these ecosystems. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on four: scrubby flatwoods. And again, all these photos were taken at the Arboretum, and as we go through, you'll see some similarities, some differences. I tried to take pictures of the trail itself, relatively easy walking. The scrub, mesic flatwoods, as we are beginning to have a little more moisture in the soil, and then wet flatwoods are areas where there's quite a bit of soil moisture, and some parts of the year there might be standing water. So if we were going to take a walk today, we'd have to bring a lot of things with us, probably an umbrella as well. But because we're taking a virtual walk today, really we just want to sit back, imagine what it would be like to walk through the Arboretum and think about the sights, the sounds, the smells that we would see when we were at the Arboretum. So I showed earlier the trails. We are going to take a virtual walk following these points. And again, as you see the many, many different ecosystems that we would walk by as we did our hike. So we're going to start at the pavilion, which is right near where you would park, so very easy access. And the Timothy R. Newman Nature Pavilion, a great place to start a nature walk. Often these pavilions will have picnic tables or benches so you can sit and talk to your group before you start. You might bring a nature journal, something to write in, to take notes as you walk or after your hike. A lot of times if it's a real hike, you would collect leaves. In this case, you would figure out a different way to create leaves, either origami or leaf tracings. And then I've listed 3 PLT activities that you might want to look into beforehand or afterwards as you're sitting and reflecting on your walk. Sounds around, poetry, and name that tree. And you'll see this slide again at the end of the hike, so if you don't get those written down right now, you'll have another chance in a little bit. So as we leave the pavilion, we're going to see all kinds of different trees, and we may want to know specifically what kind of tree we're looking at. So how do we identify a tree? Dendrology is the science of tree identification, and many of the things we talk about today come from this really helpful flyer from the University of Florida, IFAS, and it gives a list of identifying characteristics that we would notice on a tree that would help us make an identification. The leaf arrangement and leaf type are usually the first things we would notice on a tree. And the leaf arrangement can be either opposite, where you see 2 leaves coming out of the same node, or alternate, where they go back and forth as they emerge from the twig. The leaf type is broad, or flat, or needle-like. We may also be able to tell what kind of tree it is by looking at the bark. The bark you see here is from a persimmon. Sometimes it's referred to as alligator bark, very distinctive. Trees may have showy flowers like the southern magnolia, or very unique looking fruits like the maple, or this comes from sumac. But again, we're really going to look at leaf arrangement and leaf type if we do have trees that have leaves on them when we're trying to identify them. So as I mentioned, leaf arrangement is either going to be opposite, where the leaves come out of the same point from the twig, or alternate, where they go back and forth. Most trees have alternate leaf arrangement. The few that have opposite are typically maples, ash, dogwoods. There's a couple others, the Florida fringe tree. So really only a few broadleaf trees. So if you see opposite leaf arrangement, that's going to help you narrow down the possibilities of the type of tree that you're trying to identify. Alternate, today we'll see sweet gum, loblolly bay, and most broadleaf trees do have alternate leaf arrangement. The leaf type, broad, most of our hardwoods have broad leaf arrangement, and most of them are deciduous, like oaks, most of the oaks, maples, hickories, but there are a few exceptions. Needle-like leaves tend to be on softwoods, or pines, or spruces, or firs, and most of those are evergreen, but we will see an exception today. The leaf parts, once we determine that it's a broadleaf, we may need to look more specifically at the parts of the leaf. Primarily the petiole, you can see in this picture the petiole is red. That's distinctive. Most petioles do not have a color other than yellowish or greenish. We might notice the veins coming off the midrib. The tip might be a certain shape. The margin or the edge of the leaf may be smooth or have teeth, and that's going to help us as we look more closely at what type of tree it is. So we've left the nature pavilion, and we're going to go up here into what's described as scrubby flatwoods. We have walked by some wet prairie, some mesite flatwoods, and what's called a depression marsh. But we're going to be we're going to be in the scrubby flatwoods. So we know just from study that longleaf pine and slash pine might be trees that we see in scrubby flatwoods. But how are we going to tell those pines apart? Just from a general look, we see that they have needles rather than broad leaves. But we notice the tree on the left, the little bundles or fascicles have 3 needles in them, and the tree on the right, we see the bundles or fascicles, some with 3 and some with 2. And that's going to help us with the identification. So longleaf pine always has bundles of 3, and slash pine will have both bundles of 2 and bundles of 3. You may have to look fairly close at the branch, at the needles, to be sure that you've seen the different variation, so that you don't come up on the slash pine and see a bundle of 3 and immediately say, well, that's longleaf pine. You have to look a little closer sometimes to be sure that you found any variation in the number of needles in the bundle that might be there. Sometimes we don't have mature trees to help us with the identification, and we're looking at young trees. And longleaf pine is fairly unique in that its juvenile stage looks more like a clump of grass, and it doesn't begin to grow a trunk until it's a couple of years old. Slash pine, you can see they look like miniature trees from the very time that they sprout from their seed. Hopes that you have mature trees because it's easier, but definitely longleaf pine when it's young is very distinct and easy to identify. In our scrubby flatwoods, we might also see sand live oak and live oak, and you see from the leaves they look somewhat similar, not exact. The form of the trees might be very close, so we're going to need to examine these leaves a little bit closer and figure out which is which. We talked about broad leaves versus needles, and these are broad leaves. And now we're going to look at the margin or the edge of the leaf. And we see that on these leaves on the left, the leaf tends to roll under a little bit. That's called revolute. We have a little bit of that in this tree, but not nearly as distinct as the leaves on the left. So sand live oak has this unique characteristic, and live oak has a little bit of that, but not quite as much. You may also notice the leaf shape is more linear. This is more broad. So it's not only one way you can make the distinction, but the leaf margin in this case is fairly pronounced difference. So we've left the scrubby flatwoods, and now we're going to go up into the scrub, which is the driest part of the arboretum, and we're going to see a few more trees. Now you notice sand live oak appears again, and there are some trees which have a wider range of site conditions in which they grow. They may be able to tolerate really dry or just less dry conditions. Others, like sand pine, would be unusual to see outside of the scrub. And you'll notice the white sand, the lack of vegetation on the trail just shows that our moisture levels are very, very low here. So sand pine, we see in the photo on the right that it is shorter needled and has bundles of fascicles of only 2 needles versus longleaf, which is 3, and slash pine, which is 2 and 3. Its overall shape, some people say it's not as majestic looking as slash pine and longleaf pine, but it has adapted to the dry conditions and does well in the scrub. And you see on the left just the shorter needles. They do have a little twist to them, which can sometimes help you identify it. And their cones are going to be smaller than slash and longleaf. Sand live oak, as I mentioned, we might see that again in the scrub, and we notice the revolute leaf margins, the acorns, and the linear shape of the leaf. Myrtle oak and Chapman oak are smaller in size than the scrub, than the sand live oak would be. Their leaves are very similar looking. From a distance, you'll see a clump of these 2 types of trees together, and it'll be very hard to distinguish one from the other. But as you look closer, you'll see the leaves on the right tend to have this odd part where they almost roll under not just the margin, but the leaf itself. And these tend to be more flat. So that would be myrtle oak on the left and Chapman oak on the right. Saw palmetto, while not a tree, will grow across a wide range of ecosystems, moisture levels. It's very dependent on fire, and it will actually carry the fire. It burns green, it has oils in its leaves, so it's a very important component of many ecosystems that are fire dependent. And you see on the left, we're looking at the scrubby flatwoods. not a lot of moisture. And on the right, you see there's more shade. That's as we're moving into our music and wet flatwoods. This can be an indicator plant, and again, very important in ecosystems that are fire dependent. The xeric hammock, while we're not going to talk about it real in depth, I just wanted to show you that oftentimes within an area there are small places where the elevation either goes up or down and our vegetation type will change. You'll see that these are larger trees than in the scrub. There's a little bit more moisture here. We have more shade, our leaves stick around. So this is a wonderful place at the Arboretum to take a break, sit in the shade, cool off. And most botanic gardens, arboretums do have places where you're invited to sit and relax and just take in the greenery. So at the Arboretum, it's the xeric hammock on the north end where you can do this. So we've left this area up here, and now we're going to hike into the wetter area. The wetness tends to trend dry to wetter on the southern part and eastern part. So we're going to get into the Mesic Flatwoods at Site D. And here are a few of the trees we might see in the Mesic Flatwoods. And again, we have some repeaters, slash pine we might see, and saw palmetto. We're going to focus on loblolly bay and cherry laurel. And you notice, just in comparison to the previous slides of the ecosystems, we just have more vegetation of all sizes, more shade, more litter, more that will turn into organic matter. So loblolly bay, if it's in bloom, it's very easy to identify. It has a distinct flower, not nearly as big as southern magnolia, but the whitish, milky white color, very distinct. Its leaves tend to be long and linear and quite large, you can see in comparison to the hand. This little red blotch in the photo isn't a mistake, it's actually a leaf. Loblolly bay has a unique characteristic where a few trees in the canopy will turn purplish reddish, and that can be another way to help identify this particular tree. It does like moisture, so you're going to find it in the Mesic Flatwoods and maybe into the wet flatwoods. Carolina cherry laurel is a broadleaf tree that's evergreen, and this is one of those exceptions to the broadleaf rule that typically they are deciduous. When I was there in March and April, it was in bud but hadn't bloomed yet. It does have showy flowers, although each flower itself is very tiny. The bark, you see the prunus is cherry genus. You see these, they're called lenticels. They're these horizontal formations that appear on the bark, and then sometimes it'll look very what we call mottled, where it has kind of odd discolorations. Sycamores, if you know the sycamore tree, it has mottled bark with much larger shapes and color distinctions than cherry laurel. So now we'll move on to our final ecosystem, which is going to be the wet flatwoods. And a few of the trees we might see in the wet flatwoods include loblolly bay, which we first saw just the previous stop in the Mesic Flatwoods. And again, it likes moisture, so you would find it in sites where it's medium to high soil moisture. Bald cypress, red maple, sweet gum, and then our fourth pine of the tour, which is pond pine, would be growing in the wet flatwoods. So bald cypress, here's another exception to our trees with needle-like leaves. Typically those are evergreen, but in bald cypress's case, they are deciduous, and that is one reason it's called bald cypress as a common name, because when it doesn't have any leaves on it, it was referred to as being bald. It can grow in standing water, but it also will do okay, as you see on the right, in a more upland site without standing water. It has a distinct cone, almost about this, not quite as big as a golf ball, and then the very feathery-like foliage. Pond pine, our fourth pine, has fascicles of 3 again, but these are going to be markedly shorter in length than longleaf pine. The cones are what are known as persistent, which means they may stay on the tree for a couple of years. The bark is a distinct gray color. Many pines bark are more orangey brownish, but pond pine has the gray bark. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you see it looks as though needles are growing right out of the branch as opposed to from a smaller twig. That's called adventitious sprouting, and in this particular case, it's normal, not an anomaly, and not an indication that the tree is under stress. Hardwoods, sometimes you'll see adventitious sprouting from branches and trunks, and that could be an indication that the tree is under stress and having to grow leaves very quickly. Before, when we looked at the diagram of a leaf, I mentioned the petiole, and you see here again the red petiole versus the green petiole here. So this is distinct. We talked about the opposite versus alternate leaf arrangement. And we see we're trying to figure out what this tree is and what this tree is. So our leaf arrangement, we know here, if you look closer, it's opposite. So that's going to really limit the options. And here we have broadleaf alternate, which a lot of trees fall into that category. So the opposite, red maple, and again, that distinct red petiole is going to help with that identification. You notice that the shape of this leaf, this is the underside of the leaf, looks very different than the shape here. Trees often have juvenile or shade leaves, which are different in size and shape than the mature leaves. So it can be somewhat confusing when you're looking at younger broadleaf trees when you try to figure out the size of the leaf versus what the ID book says about the leaf at size at maturity. This is sweet gum, and again lobed, but a different lobe pattern than the red maple and our alternate leaf arrangement. The fruit is distinct. It's again a globe, sort of like bald cypress, but it has points that stick out of it. And if you've ever stepped on it in bare feet, you know it can be somewhat painful. But again, a very distinct fruit. And sometimes that's all you need to see. But if a tree is not in flower or in fruit, you really are going to have to use the leaf to make that identification. When you're out on a hike, a lot of times you just keep leaning down and picking up unique colored leaves or shaped leaves. But when you're on a virtual hike, you may have to just draw your own leaves, or maybe you have over the years created a collection of pressed leaves that you've laminated so you can do tracing. Leaf origami is fun, although I found out that even if it says it's an easy leaf origami pattern, it can be quite challenging. But just a way to, to keep a record of some of the leaves and shapes and trees that you saw on your hike. So now we're going to walk down the levee, past the pond, back to the pavilion. And as we gather after the hike, again, it can be a chance to just talk about what you saw, write in your journal, do some of the PLT activities that are listed here, and just kind of get a sense of what you saw and heard. This, you probably are familiar with this from the PLT activity poetry. It's a template for a Diamante poem, which can be challenging, but also a great way for kids and adults to express their views about a particular item or experience. So this was my effort at doing one about trees, and I'm not sure the time frame, but if anybody has questions, we can try to answer them now, or I can just look in the chat box and do it as the program continues. So thank you for joining me on the virtual tree hike. And hopefully there's a place near where you teach or live where you could put something like this together.
Thank you so much, Dana. I hope everyone enjoyed that hike as much as I did. And we do have a couple minutes. If anybody has any specific questions for Dana, feel free to either turn your microphone on and ask the question or use the chat feature. But yeah, I mean, Dana went out to the UCF Arboretum, planned out a hike, planned out where the stops would be, and went out and took pictures and put this all together. So she put an incredible amount of work into it. And it's been something that educators have really enjoyed in the virtual trainings that we've been doing. And like Marnie said, same for me. Each time I listen to it, I internalize or learn something new. So it's just wonderful. Does anybody have any specific questions? Dana was also kind enough to share the PowerPoint as a PDF. So that's another resource that we've been posting on that Google Drive site that we'll share with everyone afterwards. Okay. So we've all been sitting for a little over an hour now, so just wanted to stop for a brief moment. We will have a dedicated break a little bit later on in the webinar, but just wanted to encourage everybody to maybe just stand up from your chair and take a moment to stretch your arms up, stretch your legs out, stretch like a tree, get that body moving a little bit. So next up, we are going to experience 3 more PLT activities. We're going to start with Water Wonders, then we'll move into Tree Cookies, and then we will conclude with Web of Life. Do want to encourage you to go ahead and share any ideas or questions in the chat feature as we go through each activity. And we can try to talk about some of them after each activity. We will have a dedicated discussion time, breakout room discussion time at the conclusion of all 3 activities, where we'll be going into breakout rooms and thinking about how did that virtual adaptation of the activities work, and what other ideas do we have for using these activities in a virtual environment. And Lara asked if we will be sending the materials after today's training, and the answer is yes. I will send everybody a link to a Google Drive, which will have the recording of the webinar and all of the different resources that we've been showing. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Marnie Richards and Janet Schnaus, and they are going to lead us through the Water Wonders activity.
All right, now I'm unmuted. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, hey Janet.
Hey Marnie.
Good morning. I'm Marnie Richards. I am the education coordinator for Florida Wildlife Federation. We're a statewide nonprofit conservation organization. And I'm always really happy to partner with PLT, with all the facilitators, with the educators. I'm happy to be here today because I'm so thankful for what everybody does to help educate students, older, younger, give them a more of a view of the natural world, more understanding, hopefully more love of it, the love that we all share, because that's how we grow our conservation advocates and our wildlife stewards. So thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. And Janet?
Hi guys, I'm Janet Snelson. I'm excuse me, coming to you from Duval County Public School System today, working in the office. So excited to be a part of it and love being able to use Project Learning Tree in the classrooms here. So what we're doing today is we're going to go over the Water Wonders, which is activity 44, and we're going to be doing this activity. But first, a little bit what I would be doing with our teachers, what we would be talking about as far as education goes. Marnie, next slide. We would, of course, talk about what we need if we're sharing this. You are going to need for this activity dice, or if you made your own, you'll need a copy of the water cycle scorecard, your pre-made cards with the 7 stations listed, a copy of the student page. So yes, I think Laura's asking, can you share screenshots like this from the activity guide? I believe you can if you're using it with your own students or for your own training. So Marnie, next slide. If I'm going to do this in the classroom with my students, there are things that the students need to know before we do the activity. So one of the things, of course, if I'm talking to teachers, if I'm doing a teacher training, is I want the students, the teachers to know to prepare the students ahead of time. They do need to know the basic steps of the water cycle: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff. These are all tested. They also need to understand how water can change states: solid, liquid, gas. Again, all this is part of our tested standards. But then they also need to know the names of the basic reservoirs. There are some students that might struggle. They might not know what a glacier is, or they might not know what groundwater is. It's really important that they have that understanding before they do the activity. Next slide, Marnie. And you'd also want to kind of quickly, in elementary, I work with elementary, so this would be something I would do quickly. When I was middle high, I spent more time on this, but we would talk about the distribution of Earth's water. So we know that 97% of all Earth's water is ocean water, 3% is fresh. If we take that 3% of fresh water and we break it down further, we see 68.7% is in ice caps and glaciers, 30% is in the groundwater, and 0.3% is on the surface water. And of course, if we break that down further, it's in lakes, the surface water, that is, lakes, swamps, rivers. And now we're going to, Marnie, you can go on to the next slide, look at the water cycle. Something our kids see, this is something we do in the classroom all the time, but again, going over the model, making sure students understand that if we're looking at the ocean in this case, the water is going to evaporate. That means it's going to go from a liquid to a gas. It's going to go up into the sky. Eventually, it's going to condense, come back together. When enough particles are together, they're going to fall as precipitation. When they, excuse me, hit the ground, it's either going to go flow as runoff back to the ocean, or infiltration, which will be groundwater. And next slide. So we wanted you all as a team to share in the chat box, what are some strategies you've used when teaching the water cycle? This activity, I love it, Laura. Yes. Every year, this activity is what I do. Anyone use anything else? Okay, I'm not seeing anything else. Oh, songs. I love the songs. Yes, especially the K1-2s. If you can put it into song for them, they love it. And Beth says she's used it in the past. Or using the children acting it out. Dawn says using a child as a raindrop and then going through it. Love that. Or a play. Cindy says a play, again, acting it out, where they're acting it out. Students learn so much when they're moving, when they're interacting with that water cycle. Excellent. Marnie, we'll go on to the next slide, and what we want to do is go through this activity and how we would do it virtually. Oh, wait, no. Sorry, not turning it over to Marnie yet. Sorry, it's been a while since I've looked at this. So we want to show a quick little video of what this could look like in a first grade classroom. Let's look at the picture on the right first. We see some students. They have a clipboard that's got the station labeled, and then they're rolling dice, and they're going to record, of course, what they're writing. But what would this look like with the little guys, the K1-2? We're going to do just a quick little video clip that shows what first graders look like. Going a little bit slow. One thing I'd say is you see that all the, excuse me, all the stools are up. I would have them down for safety. I would not have them up. And Marnie, it looks like this may not be playing for us today. And that is
back. Let's see if we can do it from here. Yeah.
Okay. One more time. Yay. Maybe. Excellent. So we can see very interactive for the first grade. So many different ways you could do that, but it's doable for the lower elementary on up. I utilized it as a fifth grade teacher, a middle school teacher, and you could use it in high school too. Okay, and Marnie, turning it over to you.
Okay, so we're going to do the activity today, and there's a couple ways that you can join in the activity. If you have the materials at home, if you have the student pages and you've made the cards, cut them apart, and if you have a dice and a scorecard, then you can move at your own pace when we start the activity. I'll do a little overview and then I'll start our time. If you don't happen to have the cards cut out, we'll put them up on the screen so you can see the student page in large and follow along with it. And then I'll be rolling a dice and calling out the number. So one would sort of model a more independent group of students, and the other might model a group of students that needs to move along a little bit more in an organized fashion. You will want a scorecard. So if you got the scorecard, you might want to pull it out. If not, you might grab a piece of paper and a pen, because that's the way that you track your journey as a water molecule through the system. And you all might be familiar with this, having seen it before. The educators, it might be their first time in seeing it, so they want to play along with the activity. Okay. If you make cards and you want to, or if you're new to this activity and you have the cards, you might place them around your space the way you would in a classroom or even outside, and then you get that sense of moving around from place to place, and that it's fun. It's a lot of activity, it's a lot of movement, so that's fun. The cards can look like the words, just written out the words. Maybe for a younger group, you might want pictures that better symbolize or give a better verbal, or they might just be the words written out, and that's what we'll be showing as we move around. But as an example, on the water cycle scorecard, we'll all start at different stations to spread the group out the way that you would with a group. But say that your first station where you began was cloud. You go ahead and jot that down as we see in the example. Roll the dice. So you came up with a 2, and what happens with that roll is, oh, I fall as rain on the ocean. So you jot that down, maybe summarize it, because some of the descriptions are kind of lengthy. And then where do you go? Well, I'll go to the ocean. So you physically move to the ocean if you're moving around a space, and then you jot that down on your next line. It shows it as line 1 here because of the way the example's set up, but it would be your second move. Then you roll the dice again. Okay. And again, we'll have up the full view so you can see it on your screen. Does anybody have any questions before we start? So we'll go through for a few minutes, and that'll give a good sampling. You'll get through several stations. We might not get through all of them, but we'll get through a chunk. Okay. All right. So pick a place where you want to start. It doesn't matter. The stations are numbered, but it doesn't matter where you start. So just choose a station as your starting station, and that'll give us actually a more varied look at how different molecules can go through the water cycle. So start with your station, jot it down. I'll roll a dice. And first roll is 4. So looking at number 4, where do you go with that roll? Go to that station, jot it down. And the rolling again is a 2. So again, if you're moving along on your own, feel free to move at your own pace, or moving along with us, you can move through at a little slower pace. Okay, so your second one finished. Roll again. It's another 4. Where does that 4 take you in the water cycle? Roll again, and the roll is a 1. You might be noticing a pattern of how you're moving through the water cycle by now. Okay. Gonna roll again, the 3. The roll is 5. Rolling again, that's a 2. Hopefully you're getting to move out and around the water cycle some. I'm going to roll one more. So if you're finishing up, if you're working on your own, and if you're working with us, I'm going to roll once more. And it's a 6. And so finish jotting down on your scorecard where you are. And so let's take a look at some of the experiences that you've had. So in the chat box, you could share some information about your journey. Something like, you know, did you end up in any place more than once? Did you end up stuck in a place? Sorry.
So Marnie, we're seeing ocean. A couple of us were stuck in ocean. In ocean a lot, but then to clouds. Clouds 3 times.
Ocean, ocean, ocean.
And clouds. So clouds and ocean for the win. Oh, animal. Then cloud. Then back to cloud and ocean. Nice. A couple of animals. Very nice. And a lot of ocean.
A lot of ocean.
But a stream. 1 stream. Yay. Oh, glacier. We got glacier in there.
Glacier, glacier. Great. Okay, good. So that might start giving your students some thoughts about the water cycle. In the activity guide, as you know, if you're familiar with it, there are a lot of other options or other exercises, connections to different modes of teaching and learning. One of the suggested ones within this activity in the guide is a language arts connection. And the suggestion is to have students write a story about their journey through the whole cycle, where they stopped as a water molecule. And then I'm showing here just a condensed version of what's in the guide. So just as an example. And of course, different levels with different age students will come out with their stories. And we have another example of connection.
So with our language arts reading, an important part, of course, of everything that we're doing in elementary school, these are some elementary school books that I've used in the classroom. My students love them. Some of them are very low level elementary, but even my 5th graders love the visual pictures, and even my middle schoolers. Magic School Bus was always a favorite, but you can incorporate these in the classroom. They can read this, do readings during their language arts time or in the morning when they're coming into the classroom. One thing I found when I started working a lot with the virtual classroom, of course with COVID, was that some of these teachers have recorded themselves reading the books out loud and sharing with students. You can either share YouTube or you can read out loud to your students from your home. So many things we can do. Okay, Marnie, I think.
Jessica was going to talk much more about Florida standards at the end, and then after our next activity, we're going to move into a breakout.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Marnie and Janet, for leading us through that activity. And just wanted to share a couple things in the comment. Lara really liked having it up on the screen and Marnie rolling, so participants don't have to do any prep work. And there was a couple of additional folks that agreed that was helpful. So yeah, it's like we ask, you know, you can always ask for prep work to be done, but then if it's not done, it's not the end of the world because you have an alternate way for them to participate.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting comment from Lara about reading books without an author's permission. That's really interesting. I had not thought about that or heard about that. So that's something to keep in mind. And Lara, is that just in a virtual environment or in person as well?
Can't be in person.
I wouldn't think it would be in person, but anyway.
Hang on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between headset, computer. Can you ask your question again? I got distracted trying to.
Sure. I was just wondering if the reading the book aloud was just in a virtual environment that you received that guidance.
Yeah, and I think it's because like just the option for people to like record and I don't remember like all the reasoning behind it, but we were of course doing that to replace our book time that we normally do in person, and we got the kibosh. So
okay.
But
yeah,
it's
so that's a
fine
good
if
point.
it's a closed group. Like as long as people have to register for something, it was just something about it being open access was kind of the main concern.
Okay, that's a good tip. And then Janet mentioned that you can find a lot of books read out loud on YouTube that are already made. So that might be an alternative, and maybe those have already gotten the needed permission. Right, and so Rachel said use privately with a class, but not publicly or on Facebook. So thanks to Janet and Marnie, and that was a wonderful experience with the activity. And then now I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten Brazier, and she's going to lead us through the PLT activity tree cookies.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
I am dialed in on phone, and that's a little different for me. I'm going to try to start this PowerPoint. There we go. So we're going to go through the tree cookies activity where we're going to look at the cross section of trees and try to infer what environmental conditions might have happened during that tree's life and relate that to our own history. I'm going to go back up to this page. So this is written for grade levels 3 through 8, and there are variations for the younger grades. I teach first grade, so I will give input a lot about what I do with my own kids. But this can also be adapted for older learners to high school and adult. So first we talk about what a tree cookie is, and it is a cross section taken from a tree, a disc or a cookie shape cut from the tree trunk. Foresters and scientists can also get this information using an incremental borer where they just take a sample out of the tree without having to cut it down. But you could show students this and talk about the different parts of the tree or trunk. So in the middle, we have the heartwood, which is the oldest part of the tree and gives it some support and strength. Then you have the xylem that carries the water and nutrients from the ground up to the rest of the tree. The cambium, that's a very thin layer of cells that are the growing part of the tree. And the phloem that carries the nutrients and the food from the leaves back down to the rest of the tree. And you have the outer bark that protects the tree. For first graders, all we would really focus on is the heartwood and the outer bark, and then we would talk about these rings. So each ring has two parts, which they have an inset picture here, a lighter part, which is the early growth or the spring wood, and a darker part, which is the later growth, are also called the summer wood, but this could also be the fall and winter growth. It's good to have a variety of tree cookies to show them, so you can show how different species of trees look different, and also how the rings can be different. So A has some really nice circular rings, and you could show that not every tree is like that. And when they have something that's not that circular shape, something has happened in the tree's growth. So on B and D, they have marks like this, and that is where branches were growing out from the trunk. So not necessarily damaged, just the way that it was growing differently in that spot. But G, you can see, has had some damage, probably from fire. And if I get any of these wrong, some of you experts can certainly weigh in on what those marks mean. Oops. Okay, so this is a good one, nice and close, so we can count the rings and see how old the tree is. And I'll point out here is where a branch was growing also. And remember, it's dark layer and light layer, so I like to count the dark ones. So starting here, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16 years old for this tree. And you can also see it's very circular on this side, but there's a wavy line here, which could be a branch. This branch could have affected that, or a tree on this side. Something was affecting the way the tree was growing on that side. And these cracks are probably from the drying process of the tree cookie and not damage that the tree received during its life. I'm just going to go quickly through some other tree cookies that just have some differences. So this one has some different areas of heartwood or where the circles are surrounding, which could be where the trunk was split off into 2 or more. And this one is good just to show how different species can look different. So this one has a wider dark area where most of the other ones we looked at had a wider light area and a narrower dark band. I like this one to talk about how far the rings are spaced apart. So you can see that they are wider in the center in general and narrower as you get further out, and that's because the tree grows faster in its early life, just as people do, and it starts to slow down growth as it gets older. But you have some areas where it goes from narrow to wide, and this could indicate this year was a rainy year, or these years were a year of drought. And for some reason, the tree was growing faster in this year than it grew in those years. And there's another branch scar on that one. So this is a picture of the kids in my class looking at tree rings, and they are using magnifying glasses to really see those rings. And you see the student is using a pencil to lightly keep track of the rings. And a student here noticing that hers has some damage of some kind, and they really love doing this, especially seeing how old the tree is in relation to their age. The activity comes with student pages. There's one that you can use if you don't have tree rings, or if you want to have a clearer view of the rings and different variations they might have. And there's one that can be used as assessment for the parts of the trunk and some different variations in the rings. Another adaptation is to draw your life as a tree cookie. So this is one that was drawn by an adult. So she did one ring for each 5 years, because if you have adults or high schoolers, it takes a really long time to draw all those circles for how old you are. And then she has some marks for different life events. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I'll show you first. My daughter made one for me this morning. So she's only 10, so it's easy for her to draw her 10 rings. And she labeled hers, and that's what I have the kids do in my class, so you can bring some writing in. So she has her, when she started kindergarten, her first tooth. We just moved into a new house, so she put that down there. And then I would have my students write sentences, like when I was 5, I started kindergarten. So you can bring that writing component in too. If any of you have tree rings to share, you can do that now. If you just hold it up, we can see it. I see Katie has one. If you want to unmute, Katie.
Yeah, I've got mine here. I did thicker rings where I did kind of like growth activities, like I studied abroad and started my first real job. So those were growth years there.
Great. Cindy?
Okay, I'm trying to unmute. I did 5 years for every ring so I could fit it all in there. And then I chose 3 of my life activities, like bachelor's, master's, and starting my career.
Great. Did I see Kelly? Did you have one?
Yeah, For some reason, it did not show up very well on the plate, so I apologize for the faintness. I did the same thing 5 years because, you know, getting old, so each ring 5 years. And I have a really thick ring when I was in my 20s. I went to Europe for exchange, so that was a fun year. And then I also showed when my grandmother died as a scar when I was in high school. And then also my husband's and my first dog passed away, also died probably about 10 years ago. So that's what that scar is too. My first child, so.
Great. I'm going to start sharing my screen again, but I did want to mention, I forgot to say that we did a lot of these on paper plates, but you could also do it on paper, regular piece of paper like my daughter did. We don't have paper plates. And also that you can put the good and bad that have happened to you. Some people tend to go or to just thinking about scars of trees, like the fire and things, but also good things like when the tree had a lot of growth for rain. Let me get this. So there are listed in the activity online and in the actual book, different books that you can use for a literacy component. And I mentioned how to pull in some writing with writing sentences to go with them. And then a lot of educators are going to ask where to get the tree cookies. And the best way is to ask the local forester. They can help you identify what is actually going on the trees, where I was guessing a little bit. And also, you know, that they were gotten responsibly, that they weren't cut down just for the purpose of making tree cookies. They can also be bought online. It might be called tree rounds or tree discs. I've gotten some of these for crafts before, and I've found that you're not going to get a lot of the variations because they're selling them to make crafts from, so you're not going to get ones that are damaged from fire or such. And there's also instructions through the Project Learning Tree website of how to make your own tree cookies. But I always tell people, don't go and cut down a tree just to make tree cookies. If you know trees are already going to be cut, like we had some land cleared, so I actually have some that were made from trees that were cut down in our yard. And that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And thanks to those of you who shared your Life as a Tree Cookie drawings. A couple more comments from the chat feature. Yeah, Beth mentioned that Christmas tree at Christmas time. That's a great source of tree cookies. School's landscaping crew. So if you can get in touch with your landscaping crew, either at your school or your center, and ask them to save large branches or trunks of trees, that's really useful as well. So great resources for ways to get tree cookies. And again, we'll provide you with some of those resources as well. So before we move on to our next activity, any other ideas or questions or comments related to the tree cookies activity? I know those you might be very familiar with it, but in the guide, there's another extension that ties in social studies where you can make a life-size version of a really large version of a tree cookie hanging on the wall and decide what year the tree started growing, and then have students or participants research different activities that occurred during the tree's life. And that kind of ties in some social studies. There's, as you all are very familiar with, just trying to bring in the multidisciplinary aspect of PLT activities at all times. So thanks again, Kirsten, for that great activity. And so we're gonna move on to our final activity during this webinar. And this is gonna be Web of Life. And I'm gonna turn it over now to Karen Johnson to lead us through this activity.
Okay, hello everybody. I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to just ask you all, if you would, to have your chat open and have your cursor ready to input ideas into that. I'm going to prompt you to respond to a couple items. So I'm going to ask Jessica, though, to shout out or release some of those responses as we go. This is a cooperative effort, and Laura had mentioned earlier, I think it was regarding co-facilitating these webinars and online workshop opportunities. This is a prime example of why I would always have a second person facilitating these online, excuse me, because of the technology challenges. So I'm not able to see the chat, and had actually prepared to do this blind because I was not able to access the resources, and I was on my phone without video capabilities and such. So this is, as facilitators, just something that you want to consider as you prepare to do something like this. So anyway, with that, moving into this next activity of Web of Life, this would be a good opportunity to show them a page from the resource and kind of get them familiarized with how it is laid out. But for us today, the fact that the Web of Life has this nice green bar on the top, which I can't read, but we as facilitators know that that's a catchy little summary of what the activity is going to be about. On the next slide, you're going to be seeing the objective for the Web of Life. And most of us have done this before, I would think, in some capacity. But it's to understand that ecosystems are made up of interdependent organisms as well as non-living factors. So some of the background information has to be provided to the students somewhere along the line. It can be front-loaded. The teachers may have already taught this to the students, or they embed these concepts as they go in the conversation as they're engaging the brain of the students. But this vocabulary list is basically what they need to have a foundational idea about. Biotic and abiotic are in italics because that's not really introduced in this activity. But as you all know, we teach that in elementary school. And for sure, I'm at a middle school, we certainly talk abiotic and biotic factors, and that helps to move this activity forward. The idea is that they are going to eventually create a food web as a group after they've explored this background information. So at the end of this little mini presentation, we'll be showing a video of what that actually looks like if you haven't actually participated in it. So in the next slide, what components do you know of that would define a healthy forest? And what I'd like you to do is unmute yourselves. And I'm going to ask you to call out. And I just saw a pop-up of Dawn that said water. So thank you for starting us out. What else does a healthy forest need to have? Sun, diverse population of plants and animals, nutrients in the soil, sun, water, and food, fire, thank you for those quick responses. So asking pollinators, thank you. Asking people to be ready with that chat box open, I feel does encourage participation. We are all facilitators, so we all want to be a part of that and experience that, and we kind of know the answers, but you might have to massage the participants to get them to do that. So having them prepared for that is a good way to make that happen. So them just brainstorming is part of engaging their brains. On the next slide, some of the obvious components of a healthy forest are listed there, which you all had already mentioned. So if the students hadn't brainstormed those, you can continue that conversation with them. All right, so with the food web activity, we're really going to look at specific habitat, a specific habitat today, and I'm going to utilize this photograph in the background, particularly for a pine flatwood ecosystem. What might this healthy pine flatwood ecosystem have within it? Could you again brainstorm some of your items? Evidence of fire, birds, diversity of plants, species, biodiversity, turtles. I love this specificity. So let's be specific. What else? Pine trees, yes. Go for tortoises. Lots of decomposers. That's an important one. Insects, I think I missed one, but mushrooms, snakes. Excellent. Lots of biotic components are being listed. So let's look at abiotic briefly, quickly. What other things? Sand, excellent. Soil type, fire again. Great. All right. So they begin to explore. The second and third part of the activity is the students actually doing research regarding a particular ecosystem, whether it's marine, whether it's upland, whether it's a swamp, a hydric community, it doesn't really matter, but they're going to specify a certain area. So on the next slide, lots of what you all mentioned is here. Now, this would be a product from what the students have generated, or you could provide them a list of species that are found in your habitat of study or your ecosystem of study. Notice on this list, it is targeting the pine flatwood, but the only abiotic factor shown on here is the sun. So in the web of life activity, you're actually referring to more of the biotic components of your ecosystem. So from here, what I ask you to do in order to start to move forward in this activity to build to the web of life, in your chat, I'm going to give 30 seconds before anyone types anything. I want you to try to create the longest food chain that you could come up with. And as our students would learn, we would all start with the sun, knowing that energy transfer begins there. So 30 seconds, be typing in your food chain, the longest one you can, and then I'll say go, and we'll all hit our response. Okay, let's post them. Awesome. Excellent. I did not read all those out because there were lots of words on there. Love it. Excellent. Good, 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 good. Fabulous. Where would we put the worm? Or where could we put the worm? At the end. Thank you, Mary. Right. So a lot of the students would put that in there. Of course, some of the animals might eat that worm, but earlier someone had mentioned decomposers. So that could be the final link to any chain that a student had. So some students will have 3 words, some students will have 6 words, but you can always build on it by having them add that last decomposer at the end. So it's kind of fun that way. All right, so this is one way. You can give them the words themselves. You can have the students brainstorm the words. They would research the words and eventually create that food chain. But let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, if we're in this virtual setting, we can mark these food chains with arrows like this. The students can also annotate them. And as each student has their food chain ready, you can show them build these on top of one another. So obviously, what is that beginning to look like, right? So you can see that there are links to Bobcat from the yellow rat, from the raccoon, and you start to see this interdependence of the organisms within the ecosystem. Okay, so next. In their research, if you don't provide them just the words, of course, there are many, many ways to do this. You can give them color picture cards of the animals, particularly maybe for your younger students. And within the resource, there are questions for this background research to get them familiar with these connections that these organisms have with one another. They're going to select the organism. They're going to find out what does it eat, where does it live, what eats them, what shares the community, how is this animal dependent on other animals, how does this animal influence their environment, such as a gopher tortoise, and bringing up soils and nutrient cycling and such like that. So they're going to be sharing information as they learn this, as they're talking about their food chains and sharing their food chains with one another. They're going to start making those interdependent connections on their own. Okay, Jessica? To help support you, Elise, again, created a fabulous resource in having cards for the pine flatwood specifically. The card has a photo. It has detail information on the back regarding it. Now, this picture in the top left shows the Forster ant and the gopher tortoise, and it's on one document, but it's printed two-sided. It's just showing you that the content is going to be on the back. From that, to help support teachers particularly, and maybe to use as a resource for middle and high school students, I took the cards and listed them by trophic levels. So you start with the sun, you've got the abiotic factors there, and then you go into your producers, into your first level consumers, and your second and third level consumers. All the way to the right are your decomposers. This is going to help those folks that may be uncomfortable with the concept of food chains, and you can almost go from one column to the next, kind of as a cheat sheet. To support your teachers. So that resource is going to be shared with you that you can use. So I hope that's going to be helpful for you. Okay. In a virtual setting, students can create these food chains to move to get to the food web. This is just a sample. Each chain is in a different color in the far left. Those strips then are individually as students create their chains. I always use yellow for the first for the sun, and then the students would connect their chains. So this would be more in an in-person setting rather than the arrows on the static document. But just, I'm sure you all have seen this before. Okay. And the next one, Jessica. So the cards then, like the static picture of the arrows, can be laid out lines can be drawn. The students can do that physically in front of them. Our workshop participants can make those connections physically, hold it up to show you, but lots of variety of ways to do this. So let's move on and let's see what this looks like by watching a video of a teacher. This is only a part of this video. She has already set up the students with a lot of that vocabulary. The students have already done their background research on their organisms. And this is what the web of life looks like in action. Thank you, Jessica.
Bring your card up, and we're going to sit in a big circle here in the front. So come on up with your plant or animal card. Okay, so everybody sit showing your card like this. Hold up your card so other people can see it. And we have a variety of plants and animals here. I see rabbit, grass, fox, sun, hawk, mouse, squirrel, bear, some leaves, a chipmunk. I have a ball of yarn here, and you've got cards with plants and animals and the sun. How do you think we can model a web of life? Anybody have any ideas? You're first, go ahead.
We can use the red string to connect it like a food chain.
Right, she said we can use the red yarn to connect things that the energy flows from one to the other. What does everything start with? The sun. Say that really loud. The sun. The sun. That's right. We're going to start with the sun. So I'm going to give the end of the string to Kevin here with the sun. And then, okay, so we talked about something that needs light to make its energy, to get its food. What should this go to next? All right, let's take it from the grass because the leaves also need the sun. Do we have any other plants? Where are our herbivores? Over to the grasshopper. What might eat a rabbit? What might eat a mouse? Hawk? Yes. Is this starting to look like a spider web?
Yes.
Yes.
Right here.
Yes, definitely. We have our web of life. And I want you to all hold your string a little bit tight right now. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm going to give it a little tug. And if you can feel the tug, you tug. And we'll see who else feels the tug. When we gently tug and you feel the tug go through the food web, that shows how all of the plants and animals in the forest are interconnected and dependent on each other. What happens if one of our animals doesn't exist in the forest anymore? What happens if the squirrel doesn't exist? Go ahead and drop off. If you're a squirrel, let go of the yarn. So what about the animals that eat the squirrel, like the fox? So the fox has to let go of the yarn because you're dependent, you're eating that. What about our hawk who likes to eat squirrels? Kevin, could you repeat what you said nice and loud?
Each animal depends on the other.
Each animal depends on the other. That's right. It's all interconnected in our web of life. So just a final question to wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit about biodiversity. Anybody know what biodiversity means?
Biodiversity means different types of life.
Right. Right. Bio meaning life. It's a different types of life in a forest. So if you have a lot of biodiversity, you've got a lot of different types of plants and animals in the forest. And if you have low biodiversity, then there might only be a few different types of plants and animals. Like say there was only oak trees in the forest and only deer, squirrel, mice, and hawks. So if something happens to the mice in the forest, would that have a big effect on the forest or a little effect? Right, so the fewer species there are, the bigger the negative effect. So it's good to have a lot of biodiversity or high biodiversity. So really good job.
Thank you. So as you can see in this, no matter how unrelated, the students will realize no matter how unrelated the organisms are, that they are in fact connected. I would encourage when doing this activity, and when you look at this photograph, I don't know at what stage this team of teachers is in the activity, but if you'll notice, they actually have different colored strings. So perhaps the facilitator gave the folded end to each teacher of a different color, and one end was given to one person, one end given to another person that shared a connection. I found that to be a very interesting approach to this because it is encouraging more connections to the other organisms. Or, as the teacher did in the demonstration, to make sure that there's a lot of connections being put out there to really drive that idea home that when you tug on a string, that many people or organisms would feel that effect. So when that squirrel disappears for whatever reason, if squirrel population, then many other things are going to be affected by that. So, you know, just a tip on that, to try to make as many connections between the students as you can, so it really webs out there. And as well, this is a great activity to use at the beginning of the year if you are an educator, or to do with your staff in regards to the effects that we have on each other. Make the connections, you know, I'm going to connect with the guidance counselor and the media specialist and so on and so forth, and then give a little tug. There's a bad situation between a couple people. It doesn't just stay with those two people. It's going to affect everybody. So just as a social emotional learning activity with your students, it can also be used in that way, and then tie it into our subjects. So on the next slide, to bring this to a close, you're going to see that, you know, we have the list of standards. I use this in 7th grade. The 7th grade standard that this directly applies to isn't actually listed on this snippet, but when we talk standards later, it's really easy to do, just to confirm and affirm with the participants that these are pertinent to what we're teaching in a formal setting, which is always, always important to do with our educators. So that's the Web of Life, and I hope you find it useful online as well as using it in person. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. It's just great to see all the different ways that you can engage and interact with participants on Zoom, and all the different ways to think about modifying these activities, which are developed for in-person to online. And so we're going to do some breakout room discussions where we will get into smaller groups and have an opportunity to spend a little bit of time talking to each other about how did this work for you, these virtual adaptations of these PLT activities that you experienced early during this webinar. And then also, what other ideas do you have? So already we've been sharing in the chat a lot of different ideas and different tools that you're already using, or things that you're thinking about doing. So I want to share those in smaller groups. And you'll have, we're all facilitators, but you'll have one person in each room who's been involved in these trainings throughout the summer, who's going to help kind of guide the discussion. We'll spend a little bit of time in those breakout rooms. Then we'll come back together as a large group, share some of what we discussed, and then have a chance to just talk more broadly about virtual trainings, what they might look like for you, what your concerns are, how we can help each other, and all of that. We've been on for over 2 hours now, so I want to pause for a minute and take a break. So we're going to take a 5-minute break at this time. So right now my clock says 12. I quickly wanted to go through and ask each room to share maybe some key takeaways from your breakout discussion. And so could we start with Marnie's group?
Anybody in our group want to share? I can if you don't, but if you want to jump in there, feel free. Let us know.
We believe in you, Marnie.
Okay. All right. So really some interesting things came up. Hope talked about a way that she's used, she for 12th grade economics has used Web of Life, and she actually used a historical scenario with it had to do with them believing that birds were hurting the crops and killing birds, and how that destroyed the crops. I mean, so she's actually able to integrate that with students and doing that research in a real, like economic, political reality. So that was a great way to use it. Somebody, I think Mary, suggested how much she liked using the whiteboard and how she thought that was really useful in the virtual setting, and also liked the idea of the tree cards, the cards in the virtual activity, doing that, and she thought she might adapt it for Everglades animals for her setting. A couple people talked about that, and virtual, and a way to do it in a virtual, could we do it in breakout rooms, because you might not be able to do an icebreaker with the whole group. So that sounds like a great idea. I think Dawn mentioned using the annotate feature, as she does a lot of online training now, and she hadn't thought of using that so extensively. So that was an idea that she came up with. So good adaptations from what we've done today.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And how about Janet's group?
Getting off mute. So we had great discussion. I think for me, the most powerful part was talking about, as we go into this new world of half of us being virtual, half of us being in the classroom, but in the classroom, how much movement are we going to have? So many unknowns. But what we talked about, especially as we're looking at the virtual pieces, utilizing what the students have access to and what their parents are going to allow. So it might be going in their backyards and utilizing the trees in their backyard for, mapping, or, for doing our tree activities. That it might even be looking at living things. But food web, it could be going outside and looking very closely at your backyard and just seeing what are those smaller things, from the ants to the lizards, the things that maybe we overlook. And then I think another really cool one we said was there was a flying wild activity that the teachers that were in it had to go outside and create a nest with the things just from their yards. So we can take all these activities and we can modify it so students are utilizing what they have at home, what their parents are allowing them to access, and their yards. And I think that's really important. It's going to make students more aware of their own living situation and how much they do have. So to me, lots of good discussion.
Great. Yeah. We heard from another PLT state about how they had done something like that. And I think actually we'll hear a little bit later from Mary and Cole about how they use that method where you pause the discussion or the presentation and actually have people get up from their computers, walk outside, do something, and then come back and share. So that certainly is a great method. How about Kirsten's group?
A couple things we talked about was adding virtual dice to the Water Wonders so the kids could see the dice on the screen. And we just didn't know if there was a way to share two different things going on the screen, like share a PowerPoint with the different stations and the dice going at the same time, or if there was a way to embed that interactive piece into the PowerPoint. And we also talked about, I think Laura's facility is thinking about videotaping some tours, so like the Arboretum tour, but you would have someone actually walking out with a video. And for them, this was helpful because they could reach ADA compliance by adding a transcription of what was being said in the video and during the tour. And then Greg mentioned adding polls other places throughout the presentation. Like you could during Water Wonders put a poll for when you asked what are the most places that you've been in the activity, just to keep that interactive piece going.
Great. Love all the ideas. How about Suzette's group?
Okay, so we had several people said that they really appreciated the video support. I didn't know if there was, somebody even asked if there was like a pool of videos that we could choose from for different trainings, like the one of the different activities, the Web of Life activity or activities in progress. And then Cindy was saying that she really liked the Web of Life activity, doing it with or annotating it or being able to draw it with the on Zoom. She doesn't get to use Zoom at her place of employment, but other venues of using that annotation to create a Web of Life drawing with the participants. And then the last thing is Katie was talking about the scavenger hunt. Or a scavenger hunt type video for the nature hike that we did at the beginning, similar to what I think it was Elise that just said about actually making videos of the different tours or the Arboretum tour, so that either they could go with you through the nature center or the nature hike, and you could identify things together as it's the video, or they can, see what they can find, or like you said, it's a breakout, they go and find it and then come back.
Great. Love all the ideas. And in regards to the videos, I will also be sure to send out links to there's 2 national PLT video channels. One is going to show videos like the Web of Life video, where they're actually teachers doing an activity in the classroom with students. Since the pandemic has started, a bunch of different states, facilitators from different states, including Kirsten did one for us here in Florida, have done really short videos of facilitators, basically just one person leading through an activity, or maybe one person with their daughter, which is what Kirsten did. So there's kind of 2 versions of videos, and they're both YouTube channels. So I will be sure to send you the links to those. They are definitely helpful as we experience these activities in an asynchronous environment, to see how it does look. And as uncomfortable as it must make us feel right now, hopefully at some point in the future, we will be able to get together in groups again, and so we can see how that would actually look in person. Great. So, all right, one more group. How about Karen's group?
Okay, so there's a lot of crossover of similar ideas. Nicole was also talking about having the participants at least facing a window so that they can see outside, to feel a little bit more connected to that, as well as having them go outside and experiencing something in the workshop. And I was just, considering during the hike that Dana was doing, as she's describing different leaf structures, we could go out and look for an example of that. Even if it's on a bush or, a flowering plant, they can look for a petiole or the veinage and things like that. So that was reiterated. Nicole also was mentioning about having tips, like the top 5 tips of using Zoom, and preferred to have someone showing it rather than, Googling it or whatnot. It does, I agree, it kind of helps to learn it faster when somebody is showing you how to do that, but that would be helpful for facilitators. Tish is opting for following appropriate guidelines, but doing small group presentations still, and have a COVID Ziploc bag with the materials in them for the participants to use, limiting the number to 6. She's looking forward to moving forward with that. And as we all agree, we would definitely rather be in person. And she said that the reception is really, really great because people do want to be live. We're all experiencing Zoom fatigue. So I like that idea, but she was considering and talking about having a menu of activities packaged, and Tish, jump in if I'm not describing it correctly. I'm calling it a menu for them to reference to as leaders for them to use. And then lastly, there's a resource that is available for the Water Wonders, where students are actually participating with a randomizer, a role, and it sends them into the different stations which parallel ours. So I can't recall the name of that, but certainly would try to find that for everybody to use. That was it.
Great, thanks. Yes, the Zoom tutorials and guides are very helpful. And I think, you know, sharing all of those resources with each other would be great. Dawn said she made some videos and they're on YouTube. There are some good Zoom videos that are pretty quick that walk you through live how to do things, you know, showing the interface. And then there's the document that I sent out ahead of time. So definitely sharing all those resources is going to be helpful for everyone. No matter how much you prepare, there's bound to be some technical issues, but at least if everybody feels fairly comfortable coming in, that's good. So thank you so much for sharing all those wonderful ideas. And I hope that if you haven't experienced the breakout room feature before, I hope that was helpful to you. And what I want to do now, before we move into the next discussion, is I want to explain to you a little bit about what our virtual training looked like this summer in terms of it being a two-part training. So I wanted to share with you a little bit more about what part 2 entailed. So when we did these 4 trainings in June and July with educators, we did a 2-hour and ended up adapting to a 2.5-hour because it quickly became evident that 2 hours was not long enough, no matter how we tried to be more efficient and condense. So we did our last one in 2.5 hours, and that amount of time worked much better. And that's what you've experienced today. The second part, though, is in order to receive the certificate of completion, is that the participants would complete an online training. And so National PLT has a full-length 4-hour online training. But what we've done is work with them to create a condensed version of that training. So as you'll see, it's about a 2.5-hour self-paced training. It provides them with access to the ebook, and it has 4 modules. So a welcome and introduction to PLT. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we did a really, really brief intro to PLT then, but they get a more in-depth introduction to PLT then. They get access to the ebook. And then there's the how big is your tree activity. So kind of a virtual video adaptation of that activity with kind of a game and things like that. And then a hike through the guide. So an online hike through the guide. And then after they do that, they complete a training action plan and an evaluation. And then they get a certificate, and they also have the option to receive a guide via mail. So I wanted to share with you that was part 2. Knowing that this webinar was only 2.5 hours, we felt like a part 2 would be beneficial. The feedback so far, and we haven't synthesized all of the evaluation results, but the feedback so far has been that the online training can be a little bit clunky. I know National PLT is currently working on revamping all of their online trainings, but in the meantime, it's what we have. But a lot of people really appreciated having the variety. So having some time on the online together on a webinar, and then some time to just kind of be self-paced and explore things on their own. And I will be happy to share more detailed feedback on all of our virtual trainings once we get that synthesized. But I also wanted to just kind of talk with you all about some of the logistics. So there's many different models and possibilities for virtual trainings. Rather than incorporating a self-paced asynchronous online training, you could do multiple synchronous webinars. So it could be something where you do 2 or 3, maybe even more webinars where there is some individual quote unquote homework in between, and then some discussion and sharing in subsequent webinars. You could do a longer webinar and incorporate breaks. You could do a 2-part like we've done this summer, which is the synchronous followed by the asynchronous. Or you can do your own, or you can help us with future training. So Elise and I are envisioning continuing with some virtual training options this fall. And we, as you can see from today, greatly depend on our facilitators to make those trainings as excellent as they are. So if you maybe aren't yet thinking about or comfortable with venturing into the virtual world on your own and would like to help us by facilitating an activity or you know, facilitating some discussion or breakout, any way that you'd like to be involved, please keep that in mind as an option as well. In terms of the costs, right now what we're doing is if it's the online course and the ebook, it's free. So if you are going to do a webinar and then do the online course and ebook, we can offer that to all of the participants at no cost. If you want to be able to also provide your participants with a hard copy guide, in addition to, if you use that online course component, that part 2, it would be $30 with an online training and $15 just for the hard copy guide. So that's what we're looking at in terms of costs. And Hope raised her hand. Hope, do you have a question about that?
Yeah, if we were doing the online, I'm envisioning it for my own school, but if we're doing an online session and we have a couple of teachers that want the hard copy, but they find out after the train, where they think during the training, oh, I want the hard copy. Is there a way for them to order that or get that after, or does it have to be before the training?
That's a good question. So the way we've been doing it with the 2-part trainings is after, so they've participated in the webinar, they've completed the online course, and one of the questions on the evaluation for the online course is, would you like to receive a hard copy of the guide via mail? If so, provide us with your address. So we've been asking at the end, and so that could be something, again, at the end that you just ask, Hope, and then yes, we can provide those. So any other questions about that? In terms of the online training, I know I saw up earlier, it was asked if Georgia PLT could have access to part 2. And Kelly, the answer to that is right now we have been, our version of that course has been tailored to Florida, but I know I've talked with some of the other Georgia folks, and I believe you all might be working on your own version of part 2 that would be specific to Georgia. So National PLT is available to help make that happen. And so for all of you Florida PLT facilitators, if you are interested in providing access to if you're doing your own training, you're interested in providing access to that online course, we can provide that for you. Again, if you just want to do it with the ebook, it wouldn't have any cost associated with it. If you wanted to offer participants the hard copy guide, those would be those costs. And yes, Elise makes a good point that in order to complete fully the online course and get a certificate, they have to go through each individual module of the course, and they have to submit their training action plans for review, which it's not like we're grading it and going back to them and saying, oh, you need to fully answer question 2, but we're just making sure that, you know, they made a decent effort to complete those training action plans. And then they get the certificate and of completion. Just seeing if I see any other questions here. Mary said the document that we shared before the training is a helpful way to read up on Zoom beforehand, and she's going to be using that. Greg asked, did they get access to the ebook in perpetuity or just for the training? Good question. It's in perpetuity. So when they access the online course, they are sent instructions on how to create an account at plt.org. And once they create that account and redeem the access code for the online training, they will have access to that ebook in perpetuity. They can either continue to log in and use their PLT password to access the document, or they can download it on their own computer and save it. The ebooks are password protected. So one important point is that when you open the PDF, you have to use the password that you use to set up your PLT account to open it. But we have detailed instructions that we provide the educators when they get an email with their access code for the online course, and then there's detailed instructions on how to use it. I didn't go through it with you all today, but I usually in these webinars, I would spend a few minutes showing them how to log in to create an account on plt.org and to access their online training and their ebook. And so Elise made a point that these specifically are geared towards the pre-K through 8 guide. To help with the virtual format as well, we have digital versions of the participant information form and the participant evaluation. And by digital, I mean, if you are using the online course, they don't need to fill out that form as a PDF and send it to you. They will do that online when they create their PLT account. And then we have an online version on Qualtrics of the participant evaluation as well. So just keep that in mind. Any other questions about virtual? Dawn, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just figured this would be easier to speak it than type it. I taught a course on geology and paleontology earlier this summer, like a 4-day class, and I made it very interactive. So we actually sent them a kit so that while we were doing the program here and through PowerPoint, we actually had them doing hands-on stuff that we sent them. So if we were to, if I were to do something like this, you know, and I see that the online course and the ebook is free through this, would I be able to charge X amount of dollars if I put together an actual kit, a box, and shipped that to them? Because obviously there's shipping and supply cost.
Right. I don't see any problem with that. I mean, I think in that case, you would need to get the money directly. So it wouldn't be like us setting up a registration for you. It would just be you setting up your own registration or asking them to send you a check, since you're the one that's going to be incurring those costs.
So I don't have to, if again, not that I have anything in the near future set up or anything, but to set up a PLT workshop, I don't have to go through you guys to do registration. I could set up my own registration and do it all that way and have it posted on, you know, somewhere PLT that there is a training type of thing.
So you would still, we know with these virtual trainings, we still ask that you complete the training proposal form that's on that's on the facilitator resources page of our website. And, you know, that's just information about what your training is. And if you need guides and also questions related to, do you want us to set up registration, or are you going to handle that on your own? And then, yes, so we need you to fill those out. And then whether you create your own flyer or we create one for you, we definitely want to help with marketing and making sure that the training is on our statewide calendar. But yes, you are welcome to set up your own registration. Elise, did you want to add anything to that?
No, it was just the importance of knowing who's doing what. It's you know, just a different way of doing things now. So we still need all the paperwork so we know, you know, what's happening and we can keep track of it. And definitely Jessica mentioned the participant information forms are really important for us to have if it's going to be something where you do them yourself as opposed to the online. So that's pretty much it.
So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts with these virtual trainings, but don't worry, just decide what you want to do, get in touch with us, and we will work through everything with you. If we need to create additional resources to help you out, additional versions of evaluations or whatever, it's kind of like a moving target, but we're going to do whatever we can to help make it happen.
We can help you practice, or actually Jessica's good at this, helping practice with trainings. We did that before we did ours. We did at least one run through, and it was so helpful to be able to do that before we actually did the training. So we're happy to do that.
So I want to move on, and if you have additional questions, put them in the chat box or let us know. But I wanted to ask those of you who were involved this summer in the virtual trainings. I'm not going to call anybody individually at this point, but I just wanted to open it up to those facilitators that are with us today. So Marnie, Janet, Kirsten, Suzette, Karen, Elise. Do you have anything additional to add in terms of how your input or feedback on how things went that you haven't already shared?
Jessica, I'd like to add, I thought it went really well, but when we were preparing, it was really hard to get the timing down to make sure we weren't doubling the amount of time that we were given. It was really easy to go over, really hard to condense it into the time we had. So I think just being really aware of time limits and practicing helped us.
I also think that a team approach to this is really almost mandatory for this type of a format.
Yeah. I mean, for many reasons, like Karen mentioned, the potential issues with technology, somebody might not be able to make it on, who's supposed to be leading an activity, have a backup person, but also just even more so than an in-person training, have a diversity of styles of presentation and ways of interacting is so key when you're sitting in front of a computer for 2 to 3 hours. So I absolutely agree, Suzette. And again, we are so appreciative of all the help.
Just going to say it is nice to be able to work with people from around the state. Nobody has to travel. And two, having a team and not feeling like you're having to do it by yourself. And Laura was mentioning you might have someone that's really good at doing an activity or presenting activity. It would be nice to have that person to be able to tap to do it, even if they're not close by.
Yeah, I've seen a real, I think it's been a real benefit. I've done trainings along with the facilitators in my area, so I know those people. But for example, I didn't know Janet before this, and we got kind of paired to do the water wonders. And so it's getting to know a completely different person, their background, their resources. Like I've already designated Janet as my science specialist resource from here going out, and she's agreed that she would be. And so I think it's been really helpful. And like what you said, Kirsten, to have, now we can call on different people through the state and see if they want to participate in some of the workshops that we're putting together or vice versa.
Yeah, and in some ways, this whole pandemic has brought some benefits and bright spots, and that I think it's like expanding our world, really. More people to work with, different ways to think about things. Karen, you provided a lot of tips and pointers during your activity, but did you have anything else you wanted to share?
I think that what was just mentioned, I had on my list, so I won't repeat that, but I do feel that we as PLT can really extend our reach now because people, even though we might be Zoom fatigued, people can participate so much easier, as well as co-facilitate so much easier, just because we don't have to go anywhere. And we can reach out to one another, and anyone in the state can easily get to these online trainings. So, yeah, I just really am excited about having it as an alternate, even though I would prefer to be live, and look forward to helping and reaching out to others to help me do workshops for schools or agencies or whoever. You know, spending 2.5, 3 hours is nothing that, and it's already packaged. So much better than lugging a lot of materials to sites. So there are a lot of advantages for sure. And I was able to work with Sue Flack in regards to putting our Web of Life together. And it was just fun. It was great camaraderie with this whole group. So I'd like to see more of it. If we can package a little bit, you know, some more activities and, you know, give them to you, then as a greater group, we can build our repertoire to hone our presentations to different groups. So that's what I'm kind of looking at doing, and extending the number of activities that are available to add to the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Well, we've also had some teams of facilitators that have already, other than the statewide ones that we've been doing, that have started to do some virtual training. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to share how that went for them and what feedback they have. So Mary and Cole, did you want to take a couple minutes to share what you did?
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Cole, I'll do like one or two, and then you can kind of jump in as well. So one of the things that I noticed that was very helpful for us was really using breakout rooms for pretty much every single activity. It made the group smaller so people could talk more. So that was a big thing, just because I feel like people generally in a big group, it's a lot harder to talk on virtual. You end up talking over each other. And then the other thing that I really liked that we did was really utilizing the chat like we did today. I think that allows people to really provide like quick answers. Like if you're just asking a question during a presentation, you want them to provide it. I think that works. And the other thing was actually changing our names on Zoom. So that's a pretty quick thing you can do just by kind of clicking the dots in the corner, and then you can change it to whatever you want. And we did that for some quick just movements that get between activities. You know, change to your favorite Everglades animal and then put in the chat why that's your favorite. It was just to kind of get people to, you know, wake up, refocus on the activity before going into the activity. So any movement was super helpful on that. Cole, do you have anything to add? And I know earlier she was having some internet problems, so maybe she was still having some of those, but I thought all of that was super helpful. And Cole had mentioned in her breakout room movement, so asking your participants to go outside and then come back and discuss, or even just, hey, we're going to draw in this next activity, run and go grab your piece of paper and markers, you know, just to get them up from their chair, I thought was super helpful. So perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And we are over time, so I would Lara to share, and I apologize that we're a little over time, but she had to leave. But really, she said, like Elise had mentioned, the importance of practicing, especially since this is all new, doing activities in different ways, making sure if you're new to the online platform, you know how to share your screen and all of that. And then just to encourage interaction throughout all of the activities. Because not only is it hard to sit for this long, but it's just, if you don't have those interactions incorporated throughout, people start to drift or multitask or whatever, and you lose their attention. So I know also, and if anybody has to leave, please feel free to leave. I know we're over time. If you want to stay on and continue this discussion for a few more minutes, I don't plan to stay on a whole lot longer, but I also want to invite Katie. Katie's still on, because I know she and Dawn just recently did a virtual training. So I wanted to see, Katie, if you had any additional input based on your experience.
Okay, I was actually on vacation during this
okay.
training, but I did help in the prep for it. I helped with the, we created a couple of videos ahead of time. So we all went in and did the Every Tree for Itself activity and renewable or not. And we kind of interacted with those and then showed that to the teachers. So I know they did some discussion about how to make those virtual. I haven't gotten a chance to touch base with the team about what they found out, what the teachers suggest and that sort of thing. But from the sounds of what I have heard, everything went really well. The teachers were pleased with it and seemed to enjoy it.
Great.
One other thing I just wanted to mention, that Mary and Cole did at the end that I absolutely loved was, can you share that really quick, Mary, the takeaway?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So normally with a lot of trainings, we do the, you know, what's one thing you learned, or, you know, one thing you really liked. But I had seen on a webinar, basically you allow participants for 1 minute to draw something that represents either what they learned or what they liked on a sheet of paper. And then we made them all, you know, hold it up on their screen, and then they shared it. The reflection that we got from that was a lot more meaningful, because you saw the picture and then it really, I think, emphasized you know, what parts were really impactful for them. So I really liked that. I'll see if I can find that webinar tips link, because it has just like 20 different things you can do that are kind of fun. Because we also tried virtual high fives from that, just so you could have some movement. So that was a lot of fun things from that. And then just to add to what Katie was saying, because I actually did help with that training as well. So it went really well. One of the things that Dawn did that I really liked was using that poll option on Zoom. And she did it at the very end with the hike through the guide questions. So like 2 or 3 of them, just to see a sense of, you know, what participants had really kind of understood and grasped from the training. And it was nice, quick visual of, oh, okay, you know, they understood the purpose, but they, you know, missed X, you know. So I thought that was a really nice use of the poll option.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Any other ideas or questions or anything? So Mary made a tip about changing your name on Zoom. If you hover over your photo, you see the 3 little dots in the corner, and you can click on rename and type in a different name. So that's great. So again, we'll be sending out, Hope, you just volunteered.
Yeah, you're in.
We're going to be sending out an email to all facilitators with a link to today's recording, a link to all of these resources that we've been providing for the virtual trainings, and then just some other resources I've been thinking of, like the links to the YouTube channels from National PLT. National PLT actually are also put together a tips for virtual training document that I think is really useful. So we'll send that out. And then I was thinking about actually just putting together, you know, some guidelines for, you know, how to be involved. So just what we talked about, the different models, the potential models for online trainings or virtual trainings, and, you know, how to contact us and all the different ways to be involved. So any other thoughts before we close out? We're over time, so I don't want to keep anybody much longer. But I really appreciate your taking the time with us this morning and afternoon. And, you know, don't hesitate to contact Elise and I if you have any questions, need help. We're gonna, like I said, we're here to do whatever we can to support your efforts. All right, well, feel free to leave the meeting whenever you'd like, and we will be in touch. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. It's so good to see everybody.